I entered the wrong hospital room. I sang to a woman in a coma. She woke up and changed my life anew. I walked into the wrong hospital room and sang to a stranger in a coma. She opened her eyes. What happened next completely transformed everything I thought I knew about life. A single mistake, one wrong door, one song that wasn't meant for her, and suddenly I'm standing at her wedding, watching her walk down the aisle, knowing that if I hadn't been lost that day, she might never have woken up. This is the story of how entering the wrong hospital room gave me a purpose I never knew I was searching for. My name is Daniel Torres. I'm 28 years old, and I've been singing since I could talk. Music has always been my refuge, my therapy, my way of processing the world when words aren't enough. That particular afternoon in March, I was walking through the halls of St. Mary's Hospital in Denver, heading to room 417 to visit my grandmother, who had just undergone hip surgery. I had my guitar case slung over my shoulder because I'd promised her I'd play her favorite hymn, the one she used to sing to me when I was a child struggling with nightmares. The hospital corridors all looked the same, sterile white walls, that distinct antiseptic smell, the rhythmic beeping of machines creating an odd symphony of survival. I was distracted, thinking about work deadlines, about the argument I'd had with my sister that morning about who would take care of Grandma during recovery, about whether I'd remembered to feed my cat before leaving. I pushed open the door to what I thought was 417, but it was actually 471. I didn't realize my mistake immediately. The room was dimmed, curtains drawn, with just enough light filtering through to cast everything in a grey, dreamlike haze. There was a woman in the bed, probably in her early 30s, connected to various machines, completely still. Her hair was dark brown, spread across the pillow, and even in that state, there was something peaceful about her face. I assumed she was sleeping, maybe sedated after a procedure. I didn't see any family members around, which I thought was strange, but hospitals can be lonely places. I figured my grandmother might be in the bathroom, or that maybe they'd moved her temporarily for tests. I sat down in the chair beside the bed, carefully took out my guitar, and started tuning it quietly. I've always believed that music has a healing power that goes beyond what science can measure. My grandmother taught me that. She used to say that when the body is hurting, the soul needs feeding, and music is the best nourishment there is. I started playing softly, finger-picking a gentle melody, and then I began to sing Amazing Grace in a low, steady voice. I wasn't performing, I was just sharing something tender with someone I loved, or so I thought. About halfway through the second verse, something extraordinary happened. I saw her fingers twitch. At first I thought I'd imagined it, that maybe the shadows were playing tricks on me, but then her hand moved again, more deliberately this time. My heart started pounding. I kept singing, my voice probably shaking now, watching as her eyelids began to flutter. Then slowly, as if she was lifting the heaviest weight imaginable, she opened her eyes. I stopped playing immediately, frozen in shock. She looked at me with confusion, her lips moving slightly but no sound coming out. Within seconds, alarms started going off, monitors beeping frantically, and nurses rushed into the room. One of them looked at me with complete bewilderment and asked who I was and what I was doing there. That's when I realized I was in the wrong room. I stammered an explanation, showing them my visitor's badge, explaining I'd gotten confused with the room numbers. They ushered me out quickly but not harshly. They were too focused on the woman who had just emerged from a coma to be angry at a confused visitor. I stood outside the room, guitar still in hand, trying to process what had just happened. Did I really just witness that? Did my singing actually have something to do with her waking up? Or was it just coincidence, perfect timing that had nothing to do with me? A doctor came out about 15 minutes later, an older man with grey hair and tired eyes that had probably seen everything. He looked at me curiously and asked if I was the one who had been singing. I nodded, still unable to form complete sentences. He told me that the woman's name was Rebecca Lawson, that she'd been in a coma for 3 weeks following a severe car accident, and that her family had been told to prepare for the possibility that she might never wake up. The medical team had been monitoring her brain activity, and while there were signs of consciousness, she hadn't responded to any stimuli. Until now. He said he couldn't explain it medically, that sometimes these things just happen, but the timing was remarkable. He asked if I'd be willing to speak with the family when they arrived. I agreed, though I had no idea what I would say to them. Rebecca's mother arrived first, a woman named Margaret who looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands shaking as she held her phone, probably having rushed from wherever she was when she got the call. When the medical team told her that her daughter had woken up, that she was responsive and aware, Margaret collapsed into a chair and wept. I stood awkwardly to the side, not sure if I should introduce myself or just disappear. But Margaret noticed me, noticed the guitar case, and one of the nurses explained what had happened. Margaret looked at me with an expression I'll never forget, a mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and something that looked almost like recognition, as if she'd been waiting for me without knowing it. She hugged me, this complete stranger, and thanked me over and over through her tears. She told me that Rebecca loved music, that before the accident she'd been taking voice lessons, that she'd always said music was the language of the soul. Margaret believed, truly believed, that my singing had reached her daughter in whatever dark place she'd been trapped, that it had given her something to follow back to consciousness. I didn't know if that was true. Part of me wanted to chalk it up to medical coincidence, but another part of me, the part that had grown up believing in the power of music, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, I'd been in the wrong room at exactly the right time. Over the following days, I couldn't stop thinking about Rebecca. I visited my grandmother, who was recovering well and thought the whole story was a sign from God, and I tried to go back to my normal routine as a graphic designer working from home. But everything felt different now. I kept wondering about Rebecca, about whether she remembered anything, about whether she was okay. About a week after the incident, I received a message through the hospital. Rebecca wanted to meet me. She'd been told the story of how I'd accidentally walked into her room and sang to her, and she wanted to thank me in person. I was nervous driving back to that hospital, not sure what to expect, not sure what you even say to someone in that situation. Rebecca was sitting up in bed when I arrived, looking remarkably better than she had that first day. She was still pale, still had various monitors attached, but her eyes were bright and alert. She smiled when she saw me, a genuine, warm smile that immediately put me at ease. We talked for over an hour that first visit. She told me what she remembered from the coma, which was fragments, mostly darkness and confusion, but she distinctly remembered hearing music, hearing a voice that felt safe and comforting. She said it was like a rope being thrown to someone drowning, something solid to grab onto when everything else was chaos. She didn't remember the exact moment of waking up, but she remembered the feeling of the music pulling her toward consciousness. Whether that was medically accurate or not, it was her truth, and I wasn't about to question it. We bonded quickly, Rebecca and I. There was an instant connection that went beyond the dramatic circumstances of how we met. She had this incredible spirit, this determination to not just survive, but to really live. The accident had taken so much from her, months of physical therapy ahead, having to relearn some basic motor skills, dealing with trauma and fear, but she approached it all with a grace that inspired me. I started visiting her regularly, sometimes bringing my guitar to play for her and the other patients on her floor. The hospital staff didn't mind. They actually encouraged it. I'd play in the common areas, and patients would gather around, some in wheelchairs, some shuffling slowly with walkers, all of them finding a moment of peace in the music. Rebecca and I would talk about everything during those visits. She told me about her life before the accident, how she'd been working as an elementary school teacher, how she'd been engaged but the relationship had fallen apart under the pressure of her recovery, how she'd always dreamed of traveling but kept putting it off for some day. I told her about my own struggles, about how I'd given up on pursuing music professionally years ago because it felt impractical, how I'd settled into a career that paid the bills but didn't feed my soul, how I felt like I was just going through the motions of life without really living it. We were both in different ways being given a second chance, and we knew it. As the weeks turned into months, Rebecca's recovery progressed remarkably well. The doctors were amazed at how quickly she was regaining function, how motivated she was in physical therapy. She credited the music, said that every time she struggled with a particularly difficult exercise, she'd remember that feeling of hearing my voice in the darkness, and it would give her strength to push through. I started writing songs again, something I hadn't done in years. Rebecca inspired me in ways I couldn't fully articulate. There was something about witnessing her fight, her resilience, that made me realize I'd been wasting my own second chances, my own opportunities to really live. 6 months after the accident, Rebecca was discharged from the hospital. We'd become close friends by then, texting daily, having deep conversations about life and purpose, and what it means to truly live rather than just exist. She moved back in with her mother temporarily, while she continued outpatient therapy. And I kept visiting, kept playing music, kept encouraging her. One evening, we were sitting in Margaret's backyard, the sun setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Rebecca asked me why I'd stopped pursuing music professionally. I gave her all my practiced excuses about needing stability, about how competitive the industry is, about not being good enough. She listened patiently, then looked me straight in the eye and said that I'd literally sung someone out of a coma, that if that wasn't a sign I was supposed to be sharing my music with the world, she didn't know what was. That conversation changed something in me. I started performing at local coffee shops and small venues, putting myself out there in ways I hadn't in years. Rebecca came to every single performance, sitting in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else. She became my biggest supporter. But more than that, she became someone I couldn't imagine my life without. It wasn't a sudden romantic realization. It was gradual, growing out of genuine friendship and mutual respect and shared experience. About a year after we first met, we were both sitting in that same coffee shop where I'd performed my first open mic night in a decade, and I realized I was in love with her. Not because I'd saved her life, that wasn't it at all, but because she'd saved mine in return, had reminded me what it meant to really live. I was terrified to tell her how I felt, worried it would ruin our friendship, worried she might think I had some kind of savior complex or that I saw her as fragile because of what she'd been through. But one night, after a particularly good performance, she asked me to play that song, the one I'd been singing when she woke up. I played Amazing Grace for her in the empty coffee shop, and when I finished, she had tears in her eyes. She told me she'd fallen in love with me too, that she'd been scared to say anything for all the same reasons I had been. We both laughed at how ridiculous we'd been, dancing around our feelings for months, two people who'd been given this extraordinary second chance at life, but were too afraid to take the leap. Our relationship wasn't always easy. Rebecca still had difficult days, moments when the trauma of the accident would resurface, nightmares and anxiety that required patience and understanding. I had my own struggles, the vulnerability of pursuing music again, dealing with rejection and self-doubt, learning to believe in myself the way Rebecca believed in me. But we worked through it together, supporting each other, growing together in ways that felt right and real. She went back to teaching eventually, bringing that same resilience and joy she'd shown during recovery into her classroom. Her students loved her, and she'd tell them stories about overcoming challenges, about finding strength in difficult times, about the importance of following your dreams even when they seem impractical. I started getting more gigs, building a small but dedicated following, and eventually was able to transition to music full-time. I still did some graphic design work on the side for stability, but music became my primary focus. I wrote an album inspired by our story, not explicitly about the hospital room incident, but about second chances, about finding purpose in unexpected places, about how sometimes getting lost leads you exactly where you need to be. Rebecca was with me every step of the way, listening to rough drafts, offering honest feedback, celebrating every small victory. 2 years after we met, I proposed to her in that same hospital room where it all began. I'd arranged it with the hospital staff, who were incredibly accommodating given the special nature of our story. I brought my guitar, and I sang to her again, but this time I sang a song I'd written specifically for her, about entering the wrong room and finding the right person. When I finished, I got down on one knee and asked her to marry me. She said yes before I could even finish the question, tears streaming down her face, and we held each other in that room that had once seemed so dark, but now felt full of light and possibility. Planning the wedding was a joyful experience, made even more special by the community that had grown around our story. The hospital staff who had cared for Rebecca during her recovery came to the ceremony. My grandmother, who'd been the original reason for my hospital visit that day, gave a beautiful reading about divine timing and how sometimes what seems like a mistake is actually exactly what was supposed to happen. Margaret, Rebecca's mother, who'd become like a second mother to me, walked Rebecca down the aisle with tears of happiness, so different from the tears of despair she'd cried in that hospital hallway years before. Standing at the altar watching Rebecca walk toward me, I thought about that confused moment when I'd pushed open the wrong door, thought I was visiting my grandmother, and instead found my entire future. I thought about how a simple mistake, being distracted and reading a room number wrong, had led to this moment. If I'd been paying more attention that day, if I'd gone to the correct room, Rebecca might still be in that coma, and I'd still be going through the motions of a life half-lived. The randomness of it, the unlikely chain of events, the perfect timing of it all, it felt like evidence of something bigger than ourselves, a reminder that we're not always in control and that sometimes the detours are actually the path. Our wedding day was filled with music, of course. Friends and family performed, and I sang to Rebecca again, the same song I'd sung when I proposed, watching her face as she listened, knowing that we'd both been given something precious and rare. We danced late into the night, surrounded by people who loved us, celebrating not just our marriage but the journey that had brought us there, the struggles and the triumphs, the darkness and the light. Rebecca's recovery had been long and difficult, but it had also been beautiful in its own way, a testament to human resilience and the power of connection. Now, as I sit here telling you this story, Rebecca and I have been married for 3 years. We have a small house with a music room where I write and practice, and a garden where Rebecca grows vegetables and flowers. We volunteer at the hospital sometimes, visiting patients who are facing long recoveries, playing music for them, sharing our story when it feels appropriate, offering hope that better days are possible. We've learned that life is fragile and precious, that every moment is a gift, that sometimes the wrong door is exactly the right one. So I still think about that day often, about the series of small decisions and distractions that led me to room 471 instead of 417. If I hadn't argued with my sister that morning, maybe I wouldn't have been so distracted. If the hospital corridors hadn't all looked the same, maybe I would have noticed my error sooner. If I'd checked the room number before sitting down, before taking out my guitar, before starting to sing, everything would be different. But I didn't check, and I did sing, and Rebecca did wake up, and here we are. People ask me sometimes if I believe it was fate, if I think we were meant to find each other, if there's some grand design to the universe that orchestrated that moment. I don't know if I believe in fate exactly, but I do believe in paying attention to the moments that change you, in recognizing when something extraordinary is happening, even if it doesn't make logical sense. I believe in showing up, even when you're lost, even when you're in the wrong place, because sometimes the wrong place is where you need to be. I believe in the power of music to reach people in ways that words alone cannot, to create bridges between souls, to offer comfort and hope and healing. Rebecca says I saved her life, but the truth is more complicated than that. Maybe my singing did help wake her up, or maybe she was already on the verge of consciousness, and it was just coincidence. Medical science can't give us a definitive answer, and honestly, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we found each other, that we both chose to embrace the second chance we were given, that we built something beautiful out of that confused, accidental moment. She saved my life too in her own way, reminded me what it means to really live, to pursue what matters, to not waste time on some day when today is what we have. I've written dozens of songs since that day in March when I walked through the wrong door. Some of them are about Rebecca, some are about other things entirely, but they're all informed by that experience, by the understanding that life can change in an instant, that we never know what's waiting on the other side of a door we almost didn't open. I perform regularly now, at venues throughout Denver and beyond, and I always tell our story before singing the song I wrote for Rebecca. Audiences love it, not because it's dramatic, though it is, but because it reminds them of something fundamental, that connection matters, that mistakes can become miracles, that sometimes getting lost is how we find our way home. Rebecca still teaches, still brings that same passion and resilience to her work, still inspires her students the way she inspires me every single day. She's completely recovered now, with only minor lingering effects from the accident, a small scar on her forehead that she says reminds her to appreciate every day, occasional headaches when she's stressed. But she's healthy and strong and fully alive in ways that seemed impossible during those dark weeks when she was in the coma. We talk sometimes about having children, about what we'll tell them about how their parents met, and we laugh imagining trying to explain to a 5-year-old that Daddy walked into the wrong hospital room and sang to Mommy while she was sleeping, and that's how their love story began. We've also talked about writing a book together about the experience, about recovery and resilience, and the unexpected ways life unfolds. Rebecca is a beautiful writer, journaling throughout her recovery, and I think our combined perspectives could offer something meaningful to people going through their own difficult times. We haven't committed to it yet, still figuring out if it's something we want to put out into the world, or if it should remain our private story. But whether we share it widely or keep it close, the experience has shaped everything about how we live our lives now. What I want people to understand, what I hope you take away from this story, is that there's power in showing up, even imperfectly, even in the wrong place. There's power in offering what you have, whether it's music or kindness or presence, even when you're confused about where you are or what you're doing. That afternoon I was just trying to visit my grandmother, just trying to fulfill a promise to play her favorite song, and I ended up stumbling into the most important moment of my life. I wasn't trying to be a hero, wasn't trying to save anyone. I was just being present with what I thought was my grandmother, sharing something that mattered to both of us, and somehow that was exactly what someone else needed in that exact moment. Life works like that sometimes. We make plans, we have intentions, we think we know where we're going, and then something shifts. A wrong turn, a misread number, a moment of distraction, and suddenly we're somewhere we never expected to be, facing something we never anticipated, connecting with someone who will change everything. The question is whether we'll recognize those moments for what they are, whether we'll stay present even when things don't go according to plan, whether we'll offer what we have even when we're uncertain. I could have walked out of that room the second I realized my mistake. I could have apologized to the air and hurried to find the correct room, and Rebecca might still be in a coma. But I stayed for a moment. I started playing, I started singing, and that made all the difference. Not because I'm special or gifted or chosen, but because I was willing to be present, to share something vulnerable and honest, to offer the gift of music even to someone I thought was a stranger, sleeping after a procedure. Rebecca tells me that she felt alone in that darkness, that even though she knew her mother and friends were visiting, fighting for her, she couldn't reach them. But the music was different. She says it was like a light appearing in the void, like a voice calling her name, like a hand extended to pull her back to the world. Whether that's medically accurate or a beautiful metaphor created by her brain trying to make sense of the experience, it doesn't matter. What matters is that connection happened, that presence mattered, that a simple act of sharing music created a bridge between two people who desperately needed each other without knowing it. Now, I live my life differently than I did before that day. I pay attention to the detours, the wrong turns, the moments when things don't go as planned. I ask myself what might be waiting in the unexpected places, what connections might form if I stay present instead of rushing to correct my mistakes. I pursue the things that matter to me, the things that feed my soul, because I've seen too clearly how quickly life can change, how precious time is, how important it is to actually live rather than just exist. Rebecca and I support each other in that pursuit. She encourages me to take risks with my music, to put myself out there even when it's scary, to believe in the value of what I create. I encourage her to embrace new challenges, to travel to the places she's always wanted to see, to live fully despite the trauma she's experienced. We remind each other constantly that we're both on borrowed time in a sense, that we've both been given a second chance, and that wasting that chance would be the real tragedy. We travel now when we can, taking trips to places Rebecca dreamed about during her recovery. We've been to the Grand Canyon, to New Orleans, to the Pacific Northwest, collecting experiences and memories, living intentionally. We bring music with us everywhere, And I'll play on street corners sometimes, sharing songs with strangers, never knowing if one of them might need to hear something in that moment, the way Rebecca needed to hear music in her darkest hour. It's become a way of paying forward the blessing we received, of acknowledging that we're all connected, that small acts of presence and kindness ripple out in ways we can't always see or measure. I think about the nurses who rushed in when the alarms went off, about how efficiently they cared for Rebecca, about their dedication to patients they see every day. I think about the doctor who took the time to talk to me, to explain what had happened, to facilitate the meeting between me and Rebecca's family. I think about Margaret, who could have been angry at a stranger who wandered into her daughter's room, but instead saw something meaningful in the coincidence. I think about my grandmother, recovering from her own surgery, who heard my story and saw the hand of God in it, who taught me from childhood that music matters, that showing up matters, that love is the most powerful force in the universe. All of these people, all of these small moments and decisions, they all came together to create the life Rebecca and I share now. It's humbling to think about how many things had to align, how many people had to make the choices they made, how many circumstances had to unfold exactly as they did. It makes me believe that there's meaning in chaos, that there's purpose in what seems random, that we're all part of something larger than ourselves even when we can't see the whole picture. Tell me in the comments, have you ever made a mistake that turned out to be exactly what you needed? Have you ever gotten lost and found yourself exactly where you belonged? I'd love to hear your stories of unexpected blessings, of wrong turns that led somewhere right. And if you're going through a difficult time right now, if you're in your own kind of darkness, I want you to know that there's always a chance for light to break through. That healing takes time, but it is possible. That sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. Rebecca and I will keep sharing our story, keep making music, keep living as fully and intentionally as we can. We'll keep honoring that moment in the hospital room, the sacred accident that brought us together, by refusing to waste the gift we've been given. We'll keep showing up for each other, for our community, for the world, offering what we have, sharing what matters, staying present even when things don't go according to plan. That's what I learned from entering the wrong hospital room. Life isn't about having perfect plans or never making mistakes. It's about staying present in the moment you're actually in, about offering what you have to give, about recognizing connection when it appears, about having the courage to follow the unexpected paths that open up before you. It's about singing even when you're confused about where you are, about offering comfort even to strangers, about believing that small acts of presence and kindness matter more than we can possibly know. I walked through the wrong door and found my purpose, my partner, my path forward. I sang to a woman in a coma and she woke up and changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. And now I get to spend the rest of my life with her, making music, making memories, making the most of this beautiful, unpredictable, sacred journey we're on together. That's the power of showing up, of staying present, of offering what you have even when you're in the wrong place. Because sometimes the wrong place is exactly where you need to be.